Okay, thank you, Pastor. My question is centered around the emphasis of fasting and working in spiritual power. The more I read about the fathers of faith, especially the people that started revival, the Aladura movement and all of that, there's a strong emphasis. Almost like I feel like they're saying that if you don't have a fasted life, you can't work in certain dimensions of power. And I also now know that in our time now, I think we have more emphasis on need to spend hours praying in the spirit and all of that and all of that. And then we also see that scripture says Jesus did 40 days and he returned in the power of the spirit. My question is that because different generation emphasized, like looking back, they're emphasizing you need to have a fasting life to work in certain dimension of power. So how do we, because I don't see much of it now. I mean, we do a lot of praying in the spirit and all of that. So what's your view?
You don't see much of what?
Much of the emphasis. Because then you see them do a lot of fasting.
Okay, let me tell you why. Let me just tell you why people are being careful. I don't think any responsible pastor will come and preach to a congregation, live a fasted life. He can go to a minister's conference and say, live a fasted life. But he cannot come to a congregation and say that. And the reason why he will say that is that if you can find it on YouTube, go and look at the interview I did with Reverend Emiko. In the 70s, there was a movement that came into this country which had to do with fasting and prayer. And it got so bad that parents got so traumatized because their young children will fast and fast. People were hospitalized from fasting. All kinds of things were going on from fasting. So what happened at that point was that people limited the teaching on fasting and prayer to 3 days of fasting and prayer. After that, they will not push anybody beyond that point because of what happened. Okay? Because if we preach fasting here and some young person just hears it, 10 of them, and goes home and says, I'm not eating for the next 6 weeks because of fasting. They can do it now. Somebody has done it in this church before and said, I'm the one called as a prophet to bring back my generation. And he started doing that. And the parents begin to come. So there will be no balance in what you're saying. If you are dealing with people who are in ministry, who understand and they are mature to a particular point, you can teach it. But you can't teach it, all right, to somebody who is just going to hear one message and think that the entire Christian experience is just built on them living a fasted life. Because if you can live a fasted life and you are in strife, the fasting won't work. If you live a fasted life and you are insulting people and the fasting is zero, all right, and you can emphasize it to the point. And sometimes when you're talking about history, we want to honor things that have happened in the past. And sometimes we don't want to see everything that happened so that people don't get disrespectful. Some of the movements we say were steeped in immorality, but people don't talk about it because they don't want to dishonor certain things. But if you read the books, you will know that there were certain things that were happening also at that particular point in time. You understand what I'm saying? So what you want to do is, for example, when I was growing up as a Christian, my pastor told me, he said, look, there's only a record of Jesus fasting for 40 days once. Record. Once. That's what he said. On record. All right? And you don't find Daniel on record. You see they fasted 21 days. And those were major things that they were dealing with. Okay? All right. In fact, there's one of the men of God who was one of the founding fathers. Just these men, some of them have disappeared. But one of the founding fathers back then, I mean, if I call his name, people won't know him. He said, we never fasted more than 3 days when we were birthing this thing. He said sometimes the reason why people have to fast for long now is that they are watching so many things that demons have entered them that before they can attain to where we got to, the 10 days of cleansing has to happen. I mean, we're just saying that. So you have to be, history has taught us. What I'm trying to say here is that in University of Ibadan, there were people that were saying that if I fast to a certain point, I will walk on coals of fire and nothing will burn me. And this is the mental state that people were in. And people were not eating. Parents were traumatized. All right. So it's not something that a pastor will look at. The book on, I have never mentioned the name of the person. The book on fasting and praying that broke out the latter rain revival, that broke out the Voice of Healing movement. I have the book. And I knew it by style, just by listening to one of the fathers. I just said, it's this thing. And I went to check it. It's the book that is documented. But because of the error that entered into fasting and prayer, because of the fact that they took it to an extent that it destroyed the credibility of fasting and prayer, you don't allow people to have access to those books, except the person you know is a mature person that can say you can read this book. It's not what you come and say publicly before people. Where you are dealing with people of different, and somebody just hears it and hears one message and says, it's fasting and prayer, I must live a fasted life, and all of that. And when you say fasted life, Kenneth Hagin's fasted life is that they ate once. A person can hear fasted life. And what he thinks you are saying is that we will not eat for 4 weeks. All right? So you have to be cautious about what you teach publicly. All right? In terms of it there. And it's not that it is, you know, when we tell stories, sometimes we tell the story like people in the past. It's not that everybody in the past was living fasted life. It's a group of people that were carriers of the power. Do you get what I'm saying here? So if people don't belong to that group of people, there's no point in you coming to tell them about fasted life. All right. It's better that you lead them into regular fasts rather than be saying we're emphasizing fasted life. Where are you from, Senior? All right. Because the documents, you can go and read Paelton's book. He wrote it there. He said the amount of immorality in some of those movements, even though people were fasting, was very high. All right, there. And people don't report that, but it does happen. So don't think that was so perfect and pure that what we have now is so far from the perfect and the pure. Okay, it's not so. Where the gifts of the Spirit were the most in the church in Corinth was where a man took his father's wife. So you can have all gifts in operation, and you can have all sin in operation at the same time with the gifts of the Spirit in operation. You understand what I'm saying here? But I don't think people will come out and talk about the sin like that because they may not want to spoil, all right, what it is. All right then. God bless you all.